If you were asked to submit a bid for your city to become a capital of culture, how on earth would you do it? Also, how possible is it to perform two high-powered and demanding roles at the same time? Let's say primary school head teacher and leader of a city council. Well, we'll find out today. Welcome to Half Hour Mentor. Welcome to the last episode of the second series of this audio podcast with me, Ian Cleverdon. Half Hour Mentor is here to help anyone who wishes to further themselves with their personal hobbies and professional development, the focus in this series being on the creative arts. My final guest in this series is none other than Lord Mike Storey. Mike is a life peer in the House of Lords. He's the Liberal Democrat spokesperson on education and is the co-chair of the party parliamentary Education, Families and Young People Committee. He's had a full career in teaching, yet alongside that has risen from local councillor to leader of Liverpool City Council, which he did between 1998 and 2005, and became Lord Mayor of Liverpool from 2009 to 2010. One of his many fantastic achievements was spearheading the bid for Liverpool to become a European Capital of Culture, which it successfully achieved in 2008. This was a major step in the city's transformation and has played a critical part in it being chosen to host the Eurovision Song Contest on behalf of Ukraine this year. You can hear some fascinating stories about the bid in my interview with Mike, so let's have a listen. Mike, welcome to Half Hour Mentor.
Thank you for having me.
I always start with the first question for all my guests is, what was the first job you wanted to do?
Well, if we're talking about first job in terms of when you're in the sixth form or when you're at college or university, I did a number of jobs to make ends meet, including working at a steel works at Shotton, to a mental institution in Birkenhead, to managing a shop, So like most people, a lot of, jobs to collect some money to afford to do various things.
Yeah, mainly to earn money and know that's
correct.
Yeah. Was there a particular desire that you had or a dream that you wanted to aim for at that stage?
Well, looking back on it, careers advice, which was almost non-existent, in those days, it was a sort of almost the same today, I guess, that if you got into the sixth form, and I did get into the sixth form, you're expected to go to university. So they just sort of said, well, there's a cupboard with prospectuses in, go and have a look at them and choose which. There was no sort of, what are you good at? What are you interested in? What are your passions? It was just that sort of, off to university. So I hadn't a clue, to be honest. At one stage, I thought I would like to be a journalist, and I took the bold step of going to the Northwest, I think it was called the Northwest News and Sports Agency, and was interviewed by this really caring bloke who said, look, I can give you a job here, but you're best finishing your studies. And went back to school and thought, well, what can I do? Oh, I'll do law. So I applied to universities, got a place at Leeds. But sadly or gladly, I didn't get the 3 A-levels. I just got 2. And what was I going to do? And I thought, I want to do you know what I'm really interested in is the sort of creative. I'd like to be an actor. And said to my father, I'd like to go to drama or theatre school, and to which he famously replied, no son of mine's going to do that. Well, that was a sort of sign of the times, maybe. Yeah. And I just sort of sat around and thought, I could do something. So why don't I teach? So I applied to teacher training college, and this was I think this was almost in the August, and got interviewed here at in Liverpool as a teacher training college called St Catherine's, which is now Hope University, and had to take another sort of test there, a written test, and was accepted. And the principal, as he was called in those days, sort of said, well, where are you going to live? And I said, well, I just live across the water in New Brighton. He said, oh, no, you need to enjoy the college life, so you live in, and we'll sort that out for you. And I loved it, and did teaching practices and started a career of teaching. I've thoroughly enjoyed my teaching career. I think teaching is a bit of acting, and it's a bit of law, actually. It's all those things. So I've thoroughly enjoyed my time and miss it to some extent.
That often comes up when I've spoken to teachers, is that you do have a performance that you're doing. You walk on stage when you walk into the classroom. That's a common comment that I see.
It's just as an actor knows how to hopefully engage the audience. I think the successful teachers, the best teachers, are those who know how to engage their pupils and know the different techniques for doing that.
That's right. What attracted you to the acting aspect of what you did, which you took into teaching by the sounds of it?
Well, I think we can all, as you know, in our senior years, we can all always look back and reflect on if only, and I'm not sure that's always a good thing. But I can remember as a youngster, my parents were quite keen on the theatre themselves. And we used to, in New Brighton, there was the Floral Pavilion, which has had a refurbishment a few years ago. And when I was
still alive and kicking.
Yes, and when I was Lord Mayor of Liverpool, I was invited to one of the gala events, and it brought back many happy memories. But we would go. There was a resident sort of show called Melody Inn, and every week, during the summer holidays, I'd be dragged along to Melody Inn, and got quite in. It sort of sparked that sort of interest, I think, in theatre generally, not just the performance, but how something is staged and how something looks. And I'm always quite, to this day, excited when the curtain goes up, not only to see the play, but how they've set it and how it looks and how it feels and how what the lighting is like and all the sort of other side of theatre. We often, when we're giving awards for best actor or best play or best film, we forget actually the thing that makes it are all the technicians behind that.
Absolutely. So looking at the teaching then, how long did you spend teaching?
From the age of whatever it was, 21 was it, right through to my mid-60s. And I taught in a number of schools. My first job was in Prescott. I struggled to get a job, probably because I'd got involved in sort of student politics, and all my friends had got jobs that I hadn't. And come the August, I bumped into one of my education tutors, who was called Harry Armstrong. Harry Armstrong was famous for the fact that he was one of the first television educationalists. He did science on the television. You might even remember.
I remember the name.
Harry Armstrong. And Harry said, "Hello, Mike, how are you getting on?" And I said, "Well, Harry, I haven't got a job." He said, "Oh, God, I can't have that." He said, "Look, my friend Joe Bonney is looking for a teacher. Why don't I sort of get you to meet him?" And I met Mr. Bonney, and the side of the Times, he used to walk around school smoking his pipe, and I got employed by him. It was my first class. I mean, I actually did what's called in those days 11, a primary secondary course. So I wanted to really teach history at secondary level. But I ended up in a primary school, and I was teaching a class of 41 7 and 8-year-olds. And it was absolute, I can't believe this. And it was what's called an integrated day. So you didn't just teach English. You had these tables doing different activities, and the children moved around the different activities.
And was there just you teaching this?
Yes.
No teaching assistants?
No teaching assistant, just me. And I can remember the name of virtually all those pupils. Obviously, you do your first teaching class. And it was sheer hell. And eventually, sort of probably come the sort of, November time, it suddenly all clicked into place, and I loved it. And I stayed there for 5 years. Then I went to Halewood, to a school called New Hut, and I was there for 5 years. And then I went to a deputy headship in Whiston called Holsneed, and then the school was merged with the infants, so I became temporary head teacher of the juniors. And then I went to a full headship in Heighton Quarry. I was there for 5 years. And then I went to my last school, where I had a plantation in Halewood, and was head there for 18 years. So quite a sort of but all quite, not completely deprived communities, but communities where there was people struggled, but lovely people. I mean, I loved every moment of it, and still keep in touch with some families and some pupils. And secondary teachers always have the joy of suddenly knowing what happens to their pupils. Primary teachers don't. But you sometimes get people contacting you, I sort of bumped into one who said, "Hello, I'm a nuclear a nuclear physicist, and Stuart Humphreys was a nuclear physicist. And more recently, I've just had an email from a former pupil, and I invariably now say, "Oh, you must come to the House of Lords, and I'll show you around." So
wow.
it's become a sort of no. I've loved teaching, and also, of course, the teachers. Teachers sometimes get a bad press, but my goodness, the commitment, certainly of my staff and other schools that I've known, I just think teachers are undervalued, underpaid, and society needs to realise that the importance of them.
Well, as a school governor, I totally echo that as well. So I'm intrigued by the transition then to get in to becoming a councillor and obviously becoming leader of Liverpool City Council. That sounds like that was at a similar time to your teaching as well.
So once I'd got a teaching job, I needed somewhere to live, and one of my friends who got a job well before me had organised this house in Anfield, actually opposite Liverpool football ground in Granton Avenue. And he said to me, "Oh, there's a spare room. Do you want it?" And I said, "Yes," not realising it was underneath was a dairy. So I was waking up every morning at 5:30. So there were 4 of us in this house. And one day, the local Liberal knocked at the door and he said, "Look, I'm trying to get this road made one way. Would you sign the petition?" And I did. And he sorted it out. And I was very impressed with him. And my father had been a local councillor in New Brighton, an independent, and later joined the Liberal Party in those days. And Peter Cheval was this Liberal activist, just said, "Could you deliver your street?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." I delivered the newsletter in the street, and the street became 2 streets, and the 2 streets became 500 leaflets, etc., etc. And then one day he said, "Would you come along to one of our meetings?" And I said, "Okay." And they sort of persuaded me to be what's called a paper candidate, where you are put on the ballot paper. You have no chance of winning, but it gives people the opportunity, because we don't have a PR system, it gives the people the opportunity to vote for the party they want. So I agreed to that, and I was the paper candidate for Clubmoor Norris Green, which was completely council housing, 95% council housing, Labour for years. And I met a couple of other Liberals in there, and they said, "Well, let's put out a leaflet." And the 1 leaflet became 2, and it became 4 leaflets, and then we did a bit of canvassing. And lo and behold, I won. And I had to go and tell my head teacher, Joe Bonney, who I'd got agreement, I was just a paper candidate. I said, "Mr. Bonney, I've been elected." And he went, "Oh, right." And I said, "And what's more, under the local government," I don't know how I said this, I must have been, under the local government agreement, I'm entitled for time off during the day for council duties. Once a month I'm entitled to half a day. And he sort of said, "Oh, right." I only discovered years and years afterwards that he actually was a Liberal himself, so maybe he was a bit more sympathetic. And it was the time when the Liberals won control of the city council in 1973, and I became after a few years, became chair of education, and 35 years later was, the rest became history, and became deputy leader and then leader. And we won in 1998 and was leader of the council for 8 years.
So with your role as leader of council then, that how much of that, if it percentage-wise, with your teaching and your being the leader, what was the sort of the percentage time that you spent?
I mean, you raise a quite important issue. I think the trouble with local government is, firstly, the general public don't regard politicians for all sorts of reasons, both locally and nationally. And, one corruption story or one dishonesty gives the impression that they're all like that. But actually, the majority of local councillors and the majority of MPs are incredibly hardworking, in my experience. So I divided my time. I had very supportive school governors, and I did 2 days a week as leader of Liverpool City Council and 3 days as a head teacher. And I used part of my leader's allowance to appoint a second deputy at my school. And in the council, I had a really good team of, really good staff team, a secretary and a casework officer, and they were stunning. And actually, I reflect that if it wasn't for my 2 deputies at school and my 2 staff members in the council, I wouldn't have been able to do the work. And my family, I'd always always talk about my secretary in the council, who was called Mary Ann, a wonderful American woman who actually was a harpist, and her husband still plays in the Philharmonic Orchestra. So you can, yes. So I'd always say, Mary Ann, can you help with this? Mary Ann, can you help with that? So the children would always shout out, Mary Ann, Mary Ann. And there was a wonderful occasion, I'm digressing now because it always amuses me, where Liverpool was, had real problems. We inherited major problems, but one of them was the amount of litter everywhere. Dirty city. Mr. Bryson said when he came into Lime Street Station, it looked as though Liverpool was having a festival of litter. And I was determined we'd do something about this, and was interviewed on Northwest News, on BBC Northwest News, and said, look, if I can't sort out this litter problem, I'm going to step down as leader of the council. And they said, right, we'll be back in 12 months' time to see whether that's the case. And when I got home, the children were standing outside with plastic bags and litter, throwing it on the ground because they wanted me not to be the councillor anymore. Oh. They missed it because I was away from home so often. Yeah. And I still remember that occasion.
That was your children who were doing it?
Well, it was my daughter and my nephew who were doing it, yes, Robert and Rachel. And we still laugh about it to this day. Rachel is, funnily enough, Rachel is now a lawyer herself, is a solicitor herself. So there was something in the gene pool about law. And needless to say, the BBC came back 12 months later, and I was panicking. And they got the Tidy Britain group to confirm that Liverpool was, far better. So I could stay on. Phew, thank goodness for that, as leader of the council.
Oh, great. I mean, I worked in Liverpool in the 80s when I started my career, and the transformation of the way that it's gone, and particularly it was at the time that you did that, you're looking at the 90s, goes into the 2000s, and we see in the buildings now and how it's been transformed. But you're also absolutely at the key of the European Capital of Culture, which was in 2008. When did you start planning that? When was the germ of an idea for it?
Well, it started on after I'd won the May elections. I didn't expect...
In 1998?
Yes, I didn't expect us to win that year. I thought it would be the following year. And I was doing the BBC election night results programme, and suddenly we were winning awards we'd never won before. Speak and Dovecot. And Roger Phillips, the interviewer, the host of the evening, said, look, Mike, you better go because there'll be people wanting to talk to you from the media. And I left the BBC studios, which was then on Paradise Street, and I was by myself, and I walked to where all the media were gathered in the municipal buildings, and I thought, what on earth am I going to say? What can I say? And I came up with the phrase, because Liverpool is obviously passionate about sport, particularly football, and had 2 Premier League clubs, still does, just about, and came up with the phrase, I want Liverpool to be, a premier European city. And I was going to a conference in Glasgow, and we were travelling in the council car, and the chief executive was sitting in the front, and he was sort of saying, look, I've got some bits of correspondence here, let's go through them while we're driving back to Liverpool. Now, there's this sort of letter about applying to be a European capital of culture. We don't want to do that, do we? And at the time, Liverpool had applied under the previous council to be a city of architecture, and it had been a bit of an embarrassment, to be quite honest. And I think he felt, look, we've had that embarrassment, let's not do that. But I thought to myself, well, if I want to sort of succeed in Liverpool being a premier European city, isn't this the way to do it? So I said, Mr. Bounds, we certainly do want to do that, and sort of reached the letter. And the rest was history, really. We were chief executive then retired, had done a fantastic job in stabilising Liverpool. And David Henshaw, who had been the chief executive of Knowsley, came in. And he and I were absolutely determined we'd get on the shortlist for European Capital of Culture. And we did everything it took to get on that shortlist. We set up a dedicated team. Granada Television seconded some of their staff to us. And everybody was really focused on this. And then we got onto the final shortlist. And it was a proper, it wasn't just like, we'll give it to this city. The judging panel were absolutely ruthless in their appraisal. And the chair of the panel was Jeremy Isaacs, who'd been the first chief executive of Channel 4 and of the Royal Opera House. And they came on the final 2-day visit. So there were 3 cities on the final list, including Newcastle, the favourites. And we'd heard that they'd got a bit fed up of being PowerPointed out by PowerPoint presentations. So we said, OK. So when the judges arrived, they got off the coach. There were 8 judges. We said, look, Liverpool is free. You go where you want to go. Here are some suggestions. And that first night, it was a real ale pub tour. What's that got to do with culture? I'm not quite sure, but it was that. It was a performance of the Playhouse. It was, a list of things. And, of course, we had all those venues immaculately organised. So
they knew very well that they were on the list to be visited. Yeah.
So when they went to do the Real Ale pub tour, they went to Dr. Duncan's, and lo and behold, there was a poet, believe it or not, in the pub reciting poetry. And when they went to the next
coincidence.
pub, yes, there was a ballet dancer actually practising on the bar rail. And it all went incredibly well that first evening. And the next day they were going off on all various visits. But we ended the night at the Comedy Club at the Albert Dock. Right. And what had been a spectacular success went horribly, horribly wrong, because the final act of the night was Nige from Toxteth, and this comedian in shell suit, typical Scouse, started saying, "We've got effing capital culture judges." I thought, oh no. And you know, in that moment when the sweat drops down the back of your neck, oh no, this is going to be a disaster. And what do they know about effing culture? The trouble is, all the culture we've got is for the effing tourists. And Jeremy Isaac looked bemused. Miranda Sawyer smiled. She was a writer on contemporary music. And I thought, oh God, we've just lost it. The next morning, we meet the judges to set them on the way to visit these places, which they could choose. Well,
that's it, blown now.
And I said, Jeremy, I'm really sorry about last night. And he said, sorry? He said, when I got up this morning, he said, I had a message from one of your residents. And he got out the letter, and the resident had said, "Dear Jeremy, I'm really sorry about last night. I was at the club, and this is not how, you must have been really embarrassed." And Jeremy looked at me and said, "But I effing enjoyed it." And then that night, we'd found out, just to show how well planned we were, we'd found out that he was a Chelsea fan, and there was a Chelsea match we organised, unbeknown to him, that he'd go to this pub and watch. It sounds like it was all pub-based. It wasn't, I promise you. And we just made sure there were a few Chelsea supporters in the pub as well. But no, our bid was, joking apart, I mean, it was about inclusion. It was about turning cities round. It was about making sure that it wasn't just about the city centre. It was some of the projects we did outside the big cultural events. And one thing that always sticks out in my mind, where I just, to this day, think about it, and it was an inner city school which no longer exists, so an 11 to 16 Roman Catholic school, Roman Catholic boys' school, and huge unemployment in the area, truancy in the school. And they got a grant to make a film, and they were given a film producer, and 8 of the boys did this project. And the drama teacher at the school was honestly Miss Jones, and she was stunning. And they made the film, and they had an opening night, red carpet outside the school. We went in, and it was life-changing for that school and those boys. And truancy levels improved dramatically, and of the 6, they all got good marks in the GCSEs, and some of them wanted to go on to do A-levels, and they didn't do A-levels, and 2 of them wanted to do A-level drama. Right. And Miss Jones carried on at the school and did A-level drama. Fantastic. So I just think things like that we forget, and we're thinking about, opening ceremonies and fantastic operas and concerts. Yeah. Actually, it's what happens at grassroots level that's so important.
Absolutely. And that goes back to a previous podcast where I interviewed Steve Bennett, who's theatre director at Cambridge University, who his first job was teaching pottery, and found that, again, in a school that was, had quite a lot of delinquency, but they found their creative bent, if you like, just through that. And it's just finding that extra bit. So when was the bid? When was it successful? In what year?
This was the year before. We were going to be Capital Culture in 2008. Obviously, there was a planning period. And part of our bid was to celebrate each year with an event to build up our capacity. So we had Year of Performance, we had Year of the Sea, we did all those we had themed years to build up the capacity to be able to do Capital Culture. And when we actually had the year before had been our 800th birthday. So Liverpool celebrated 800 years in 2007. And that was if you like, the dress rehearsal for the Capital Culture Year. And the figures at the end of it, anybody who sort of says, culture, what does that? That's not real jobs. I mean, they're talking nonsense. I mean, for Liverpool, it was just not only an amazing experience, but it changed the city, and for good. We had languished in terms of tourists visiting the city, and we suddenly shot up into the top 3, and we're still in a good position tourist-wise. We were languishing in people coming to shop in the city. We were about 17th, and of course, on the back of Capital Culture, we built Liverpool One, and we shot up to in the top 3 of retail destinations. We built a cruise liner terminal, so for the first time in many years, cruise liners were coming up the Mersey. And what's the importance of that? Well, because passengers get off and spend the money in the city, and spending the money creates jobs, et cetera, et cetera. We built the canal across the Spearhead. We created a science park with the universities, and all those are on the confidence that it gave the city. And I always say that in any situation, in any job, the hallmark of success is that you have confidence in what you do. And Liverpool, as a city, had lost its way because it's lost its confidence. And not surprisingly, really, with some of the, high-profile events, whether it be, Heysel Stadium, Hillsborough, the caricature of Liverpool in the television comedy Bread, all thieving Scousers, which just wasn't the case. And Liverpool felt, nobody loves us. And they became very introspective and looked down. And suddenly, we're Capital of Culture. We can do anything. And that confidence level soared. And when you're confident, you take risks and you're prepared to do things which you wouldn't normally do.
The results, people visit. If you're not from Liverpool and you don't know it, come and have a look, because the transformation, fantastic city to visit. You've moved on to your position in the House of Lords, your responsibility for education and families and young people. And this series is about creative arts as well. So you've obviously just explained a lot about your experiences with the Capital of Culture and your teaching background. What do you see perhaps as the opportunities for young people, and perhaps even the challenges as well, for getting into the likes of creative arts?
I think I'd slightly widen that. I mean, I think it's really important that young people don't fall into this sort of trap of thinking that there's only one line of development, i.e. you've got to get your GCSEs and go into the sixth form and go to university. I mean, there are whole different routes of progress, and we need an education system, in my mind, that realises that we have to develop pupils, and all pupils have different strengths and different skills, and half the pupils in our schools are not academic, for starters. So why are we ignoring the other half? It is in a sense easy if you have a real passion or a real vocation to be a doctor or to be a vet or to be a nurse or to be, you know what I mean? You can focus on that. But the vast majority of young people don't really know what they want to do. And
for the point that you said about your father earlier on, thinking, yes. It's almost like you're wasting your life.
Correct. So thank goodness that, gone are the days of here's the university prospectuses. There is a much better career development in school. So that's the starter. And my view is that you should, in a sense, I know this sounds a bit highfalutin, but you should follow your dream. And if you've got a dream and a passion, you have to follow that. You can't just think, I can't do that, I can't succeed at that. Rubbish, you can if you want. And there are different ways of doing that. Thank goodness our education system now is beginning to be, provide different routes. An apprenticeship is often the best way. And if you look at creative industries, or if you look at creative arts, go and do some work experience. Work experience is a brilliant way to find out whether you like it. I'm going back to my own daughter. She thought she wanted to do law, but she went and did work experience in a law firm and thought, yeah, this is for me.
And it might not be as well.
And it might not be, of course, you're absolutely right. You might come away saying, no, this is not for me. And then when you've done that, then decide, am I going to go to college? Am I going to go to drama school? Am I going to go to theatre school? You know, if I'm a technician in the creative arts, you know, a camera person, a lighting person, you know, set designer, then that's a certain expertise where you do need to go to particular colleges. If you want to be an actor, then I think you have to be realistic about that. Many people who want to be actors will have a career in acting, but they won't reach the great heights that they think maybe they're going to get and may be disappointed. But you've got to be prepared for that and understand that. And it's a very tough business. If you're going to be, a musician, then your musical skills will propel you into that job. I think my advice would be to go, not just to get careers advice from school, but if you want to be in the creative arts or creative industries, check it out with different people and talk it over. Now, often children from disadvantaged backgrounds don't have the networks they need, where, you know, children from more stable communities, if I can use that phrase, if it's the right phrase, often have a whole network of people they can go to.
Parents or family, people.
Your daughter can come and do work experience at our law firm. Your daughter or your son can come and do this. If you're living in a deprived community, to find those opportunities is much, much harder. And I just hope that we can... I look at Parliament and I look at young people who come as to do work experience or interns. I have to say, you couldn't do that if you lived on a council estate in Sheffield or Nottingham or Liverpool. How would you afford it?
Yeah, you'd have to be London-based.
You'd have to be London-based, or you'd have to have wealthy parents who can pay for it. So, I mean, I managed to persuade the Lib Dems in Parliament to have a paid internship at living allowance for somebody from a deprived community, and it's been a huge success. You know, we've had 2 young people from social housing in deprived communities who've gone on to great things. We've had people from ethnic backgrounds who've gone on, they do 18 months, have gone on, and the transformation of them is just amazing. So it's not an easy answer. You know, there's no particular way. But I think my overall observation is that you need to take advice from people who have some understanding.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of schools and universities and just having a wider network and asking around can really help with that. Just give
Correct.
it a go.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Great. Mike, that's been really insightful. Thanks ever so much for your time. I've got one final question that I ask all of my guests. So that's knowing what you know now, after all of that experience that you've had, what one piece of advice would you give that younger self?
What I said earlier, follow your dream. It's as simple as that. And if that's what you want to do whatever it takes to get there, and you'll succeed in the end.
Mike Storey, thanks very much indeed.
My pleasure.
It's just incredible how passion threads through so many of the achievements of my guests, not just in this series on the creative arts, but in every episode to date. I loved hearing about Mike's experiences with the bid for the European Capital of Culture and how he set that 12-month deadline in which he vowed to clean up the litter issue in the city. You can also sense his determination to help young people develop and be successful. Huge thanks go to Mike for taking time out of his busy parliamentary schedule to sit down with me and share his experience for your benefit. However, this isn't the last you've heard from Mike, as I also subjected him to my quick-fire question round, which you can hear the day after this one is released. Stand by for a very interesting story about Joanna Lumley. This is the last of the full episodes in this series. Given that the focus on the creative arts has been so well received, I fully intend to continue the arts theme in Series 3, which will hopefully return in the late summer of this year 2023. However, before this, I plan to release a series of special episodes over the summer that focus on specific skills such as teaching, developing a career path, and fiction writing, all drawn from the fabulous experiences of my guests to date. It's a sort of greatest hits compilation series of episodes, if you like. Make sure you subscribe to the series via podcast platforms and social media if you haven't already, so that you're notified of their release. It'd also be really helpful if you could rate and review the podcasts, whether that be on your preferred listening platform, on social media by searching for Half Hour Mentor, or even by sending me a testimonial via the email address that you can find in the show notes. Do also go back and have a listen to any episodes you've missed. There's a treasure trove of career and personal development experience out there. Thanks very much for listening, and until next time, bye for now.